I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old-timer. We're here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends Podcast. All right, Steve, if you're brand new and you're worried about a relapse, one of those things that you got to worry about are those caution signs and those red lights that you ignore along the way. That either prevents you from getting sober or it keeps you from staying sober. Very rarely does a relapse happen totally out of nowhere. You were minding your own business as you were on your knees praying to your higher power in the middle of a meeting. Doesn't quite happen.
No, not quite.
What's your thoughts there? Because you're of the two of us, you had the relapse. I did not, and I'd like to learn from you.
Well, a couple things about this thing. One is the first time coming through, I look at back, and again, this stuff is in hindsight mostly, not all of it, mostly in hindsight. But I think about all the different signs that I had early on that I had a problem with alcohol that I ignored and kept me out there for such a long time of drinking. And I've talked about it bits and pieces along the way, but never sort of all in one place. And it started with, me getting arrested for a DWI at 19 years old, right? 19 years old. I had a DWI. Back then it was called the DWI, not a DUI.
I remember that phraseology because I'm getting old too.
So, and again, I mean this honestly. I told the story, but I got a DWI. They booked me. I called my dad. He came and picked me up. And I was probably two and a half, maybe 3 hours by the time he got me and I was able to leave the precinct. And the thing he said to me on the way home was, "You okay to drive?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he dropped me off in my car and I drove home. I mean, right? 19 years old, first DWI. That's how I grew up. So like even that, there was no hint that I had an alcohol problem at that time, right? If that's not, anybody who would get a DUI today would be at least a caution sign, right? Maybe a red light, but at least a caution sign. And the fact that I got it at 19, it had no impact on me. All right, it had no impact on me. So those are the type of things, and I could go through a whole bunch of stuff that there were signs, and I kept, first of all, I didn't see a bunch of them. I just went right by them, and then even when I saw them, I dismissed them. I dismissed them early on, and then by the time that I saw them and realized that they were true and what they were telling me, I was unable to stop at that point. So that's sort of what I had in mind when we were talking about the subject. And again, it's easy for me when I relapse. The biggest caution sign I stopped doing my program. Right? I stopped going to meetings. I stopped talking to the alcoholics. That was the biggest one. But there were other things, right? For when I relapsed, I started after many years too. I started toying with the non-alcoholic beers, right? So I met my wife, who was new to me, and she didn't know anything about my alcoholic history. She knew I was in recovery, and we would start. So we had a new set of friends, and when we would go over their house, they knew I wouldn't drink, and they would have some old duels for me, right? And or whatever, and then I would do that, So that, so those were certainly on my relapse, those were the signs, right? No meetings, starting to toy, starting to go out with everybody, literally start going out to bars, drinking old duels with everybody else who was drinking. That was just me waiting to relapse. And I didn't notice those signs. That wasn't something I was, again, thinking, I'm going to relapse. I was like, no, I'm sort of managing my alcoholism. I'm managing me not drinking by drinking this non-alcoholic beer,
I had O'Doul's a long time ago, and I just remember it being gross. Not at all a beer-like experience.
O'Doul's wasn't, but there was one out there called Amstel, which was a pretty good beer. There's a couple out there that were pretty good beers. When she started drinking that and I started playing around with it, I started searching for some of those better ones. There were some pretty good ones out there.
There's lots out there now. They have good stuff.
Absolutely.
I'm not interested in it because I want to change my relationship. I want to change my relationship with alcohol, but I want to change my relationship with the things I drink anyways. I'm not looking for things that have that alcohol feel or taste at all. If that makes sense. If it works for you, it works for you. There's a lot of people who do an alcoholic wine or non-alcoholic hard liquor. I just don't want to be in that pattern. I want to do something else.
And I think a lot of the people who are doing that are people who sort of figured out that they wanted to cut back on alcohol before they had a real problem. Not all of them. I'm not going to paint with a broad brush, but a lot of them were not big time alcoholics. They didn't drink, I don't believe, the way I drank at the end, which was just drinking till I passed out every night. And so they're the difference, right? People can use those non-alcoholic, especially now, right? There's this whole thing of non-alcoholic drinks and beers and wines out there, just like you said, that people can go out and enjoy just because they want to do less alcohol. Maybe not do no alcohol, but do less alcohol. But I'm really talking about, and I'll give you a few of these things that I went through. But so I got that DWI when I was 19. Okay. The other things that happen again, and this is a lot of this, could be chalked up to just being young and drinking. But I turned 18 when I was in 1976, right? 1976 was, so you can figure out how old I am if you want to do that math. But 1976 was our bicentennial. And for our bicentennial, me and the guys I was hanging on with, a couple of the guys, we decided to celebrate the bicentennial by drinking 1,976 beers, right? Throughout the year.
How many guys?
Two other guys, three of us.
How,
right?
over what period of time?
Up until the 4th of July. So for 6 months, right? 6 months. So 1,976 beers. We were drinking Michelob at the time, and we literally would save the caps. That's how we counted. We drinking Michelobs, and we bought Michelobs, and we would save all the caps. And we did that easily. Right? So we drank all the time. And that was, that was when I was a senior in high school. I was drinking before school. And again, none of this mattered. Like, I would drink before school. I would drink after school. I would drink all the time. Never thinking that there was a problem. Just that's how I drank. And I didn't have to drink back then. That wasn't like I would have. That was young drinking. I drank. And if I didn't drink, that was fine. But I think in hindsight, if my kids told me, hey, for this year, for 2020, I'm going to try to drink 2020 beers, I would say you may want to rethink that. Like you may want to think about your goals and stuff. Yeah, another thing that came up for me early on, and I've talked about this before, but I went back to school when I was married. And I had just gotten married and was going to night school, actually. And then I went back to school full time. And I took a job in a semiconductor plant here in Connecticut, where we live. And this plant manufactured semiconductors, and they used a lot of chemicals and toxic gases and stuff. So there's a lot of safety protocols around this whole thing. And when I started this, it was like an internship, paid internship. They had a health fair going on. Now, when I was in school, I didn't drink. It was one of the times, it was before I had to drink all the time. I had a problem. In hindsight, I had a problem by then. And it became clear to me within a year or two that I had a problem. But I was not drinking much. I would only drink very little at this time. And I took this health fair, all the tests that they did. It was a mobile thing. Breathing, blood work, everything, all this kind of stuff. And one of the things they ask you about lifestyle. And I don't remember what the questions were, but when I got back the results here in this page, which was probably, 6 to 10 pages long, all different types of stuff on it. One of the things it said to me was, you may have a problem with alcohol. And I went, that's strange. I don't even drink. Like right at that moment, I wasn't drinking. I'm like, whoa, that's kind of strange. I never forgot it.
I wouldn't have.
Right. You may have a problem with alcohol. So I guess whatever the questions were, I answered them honestly. And it just, again, so that stuck in my mind. I always remembered that. And that was one of those caution signs, right? That was one of those caution signs. I was in my late 20s by that time. Okay. And that was the beginning. Like, that's when I started inching that road to problem drinking. Even though I was not drinking at that moment, I knew that there was a problem coming up. That problem came very clear to me within a year, about a year or so. And that was, I was finishing up that schooling. And again, I may have mentioned this before, but I was doing really well in that class. I was third in my class, and all the guys were going out partying. They were younger than I was, and I always stayed away from it. I was married. I never went out with them partying, but I decided at this time to go out and party with them on Christmas break. We had one semester left, and I went out and we drank. And that whole next semester I drank, which was unusual for me while I was in school. I drank that whole semester. And I went from 3rd to 10th in my class, So that's a really good job. It wasn't a huge class, That was the first time I realized that when I picked up a drink and I started drinking, that I had trouble stopping. That was the first time I realized that. And again, it was a caution flag. That might have been, I was like, huh. But then I went on to University of Connecticut for my bachelor's. And again, I didn't drink because it was a very difficult school for me. So, but that same pattern happened when I got to the end, when I knew I was going to graduate, I started that cycle over. So those are the type of things that I saw in my drinking that had I stopped, I could have saved myself a lot of pain. I could have saved myself a divorce, a broken marriage, all kinds of really, really bad behaviors, but I didn't. And that's what sort of what I wanted to talk about tonight.
I heard a red flag behavior that you didn't speak of. Because you went to UConn and it was hard, you didn't drink. So if you're in a position where, you know what, I'm not going to drink because of this situation, because I need all my mental faculties, that's the sign of a problem.
Yeah.
My wife is going to have a red flag for her drinking because she doesn't want to have a headache later when she has half a glass of wine.
Yeah, right.
That's a mild red flag.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of it, but I'm not going to, and if I'm feeling it, I'm just going to put it down and I'll be fine. I've been in those situations where I'm going out in public. There might be work people around. I don't know if I trust myself. I'm going to choose not to drink in this situation so I don't make an ass of myself. And I could tell myself that's a sign that I don't have a problem. But if you're doing that, there actually is a sign that you have a problem. That if you have to feel like I have to be on my best behavior and not have any alcohol because I'm afraid of what's going to happen, it's a red flag. If you're brand new or you're considering having a problem, here's going to be the flaw in you listening to what we're going to say. Because this is what I did. I discounted all these red flags. Oh, I got a DUI. People get a DUI. The blood alcohol rate is ridiculous now at 0.8. Somebody told me to stop drinking, or I got a medical thing. Well, the doctors tell you you can't eat any sugar and you can't eat any fat and you have to eat all vegetables. So the threshold on everything is so low across the board and you got to have 45 minutes of strenuous exercise. Okay. Who can really do that? You shouldn't drink more than a few drinks a day. Well, who can really do that? I would caution you that we're not over-exaggerating this stuff. And I want you to think about the people who don't ever drink and don't have a problem. Do they worry about these things? And if you're different, that's a red flag. I got another one, red flag. You've gone and Googled the alcoholic tests to see if you're an alcoholic.
Right.
You know how many times my wife has done that? 0 times.
Right.
Because she doesn't have a problem.
I agree. No, my wife too. I agree. There's not me. That's the first thing we talk about it at our meetings all the time. Yeah, if you're thinking about that, if you're thinking about, I should take this test, then you already probably have a problem. And I think it was mentioned last night, if I'm not mistaken, at our meeting. We talked about managing our drinking. We've talked about it before, like, I'm not going to drink at this party because, I mentioned it last night. I think I always had this public face I had to put on, so I always was managing my alcohol drinking when I was out in public amongst family and friends and stuff like that. I mean, unless they were very close to me, and then, I would drink the way I wanted to drink. But, and somebody said, just the fact that, like you said, that I had to think about that and manage that. I had to think about, I better manage the way I behave and drink at this social gathering so I don't make a fool of myself. Yeah, that's a big red flag. That's the stop sign, like, whoa, what's going on here, right? And it's easy for us to discount it. And I love the way you put it, that we can make it sound like, oh no, I'm being responsible. I'm going to go out in public and I'm going to be responsible and not overdo it. But I really would question yourself. And it's hard, right? That inventory that we take of ourselves when we're in this 12-step program in AA, that's a difficult inventory that requires a lot of honesty, right? And one of the things I think we all struggle with is that honesty of looking at ourselves. Some of us struggle, and it's very hard for us to really be honest that, yeah, maybe we have a problem. I'll give you another one. And this is one of the ones that hit me. This was one of the ones I knew I had a problem. And I've mentioned it. I know I've mentioned this before on this podcast, but I'm a big blood donor. Still today, I'm a big blood donor. And I've given blood since I went to high school. I've told this story. The first time I ever gave blood, I gave blood in high school. I forgot to get my parents to sign the note, which was fine. They would have signed it. And some girl at high school signed it because if I gave blood, I could get out early. And me and about 3 other guys decided we were going to give blood and then go out and drink because we'd be able to get a little buzz faster, right? We'd down a pint of blood, so I'll be able to get a faster buzz by drinking. And I've given blood my whole life ever since that. Well, when I really started having a problem, I gave blood one night. I had been drinking. I was working at a town about 50 miles away from home. I gave blood down in that area, so I was down in that area. It gave me a reason to sort of hang out down there, and I started drinking before I got there. And I got there and I gave blood. And about, 3, 4 weeks, 5 weeks later, whatever it was, a letter showed up from the local Red Cross who collected the blood where we are. And they said my liver enzymes were high and that they would no longer accept my blood, right? Because my drinking had started to take its toll on my liver. Now, that was a huge red flag. That was a huge, yo, you better stop, And I knew that was a problem, and I totally ignored that completely. And I ignored it because I didn't think I could do anything about it. I wanted to, but at that point, I didn't feel like I could. I didn't feel like I had any choice but to keep drinking.
Here's why I ignored those things. And as I'm thinking around the mindset of why I ignored the red flags, it was the same feeling I had on 9/11 when I watched the second plane go into the World Trade Center. When I saw the second plane go into the World Trade Center, my first thought was, this is so freaky that there were 2 plane crashes into these buildings on the same day, that it's coincidental. Because in my mind, if it was real, then the world is going to change and maybe I have to do something. Same thing with alcohol. If I have a problem, there are some things that are going to have to change in my life in ways that I can't imagine today. And that is too much for me to absorb. So it's a lot easier to go into denial. And the stopping of drinking means my life is going to be over. There will be no more fun. I won't progress. Maybe I'm never going to get a girlfriend or a wife. I'm going to be living alone and life is going to stop. That's really what's going through my head if I have to stop drinking. Now, the opposite is true, but I can think through those things. I had hell of a red flag in college that we went out pledging a fraternity. They bought me a bunch of drinks, and the next thing I know, I'm waking up and I look over and I've got a drip in my arm and my white shirt is totally filthy. And I was in the hospital. I got alcohol poisoning. Wow. That didn't stop me. I should have stopped right there. Yeah, I mean, it could get away from you, but, alcohol poisoning, you got to drink a lot to get to that point. And if you get past the alcohol poisoning and you continue to drink, that's stupidity that you're playing with fire. And people knew me because I ended up in the hospital, and I thought I was like a little mini celebrity.
Yeah.
Totally the wrong view of this.
No, listen, there are some funny stories sometime associated with events. And I still know the guys who I hung out with when I got to DWI, and there's a funny story attached to it, and it's funny. It still is funny today, but again, it's in hindsight, it's totally different. But we were all drinking after a stag party. Everybody was drinking, and turns out that I was following a guy who was bringing another drunk guy home, and when he saw me get pulled over, he went back to his apartment, and they all came to the police precinct to try to get me out of there. And it's a funny story, right? But it's like you said, I tell that story and I feel like just like you, I feel like this mini celebrity, right? Oh yeah, remember when you guys came, you tried to bust me out of jail, right? That kind of talk, and we laugh about it still today, but it's serious, If that's something that was happening to if I look at my kids, if that was something that was happening to my kids, then I'd be concerned. I wasn't concerned about myself back then. And that's easy today, right? I mean, I have children today, and I remember, I started drinking early, like many of us did. I started drinking at 13, 14, certainly by 15, I was smoking pot and stuff like that. And I looked as my kids went through those ages. I can remember watching my kids at 13 and 14 thinking, oh my God. Like, I know my kids weren't drinking at 13 and 14. I mean, but just how young they were. Again, those are things that we can talk about. It's the way I saw on a Facebook post today, somebody said that somebody in the local town that I live in, that somebody offered their 12-year-old son some pot. And I thought, yeah, I just thought, yeah, that's just the way it is, right? I mean, yeah, your 12-year-old son, your 13-year-old son, your 14-year-old son, they're going to be offered pot. They're going to be offered alcohol. They're going to be offered harder drugs than that. It's really hard. It's a really touchy thing. I remember sitting down with my kids and telling them at that age, like, listen, you're going to be offered some stuff. You're going to have to make some decisions that I can't help you make. But again, I can look at those things in hindsight. Certainly as a 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old, I couldn't figure it out. But if I started to put all the pieces together, by the time I was 19 and got a DWI, maybe I should have. And my father didn't do it. No, who did it for me? My grandfather. I remember going to my grandfather's, who's the one who got me a lawyer, who, went to court with me. And I can remember my grandfather cautioning me about my drinking. My father never did, because my father drank too. I think I think my grandfather probably had some problems with alcohol. I don't think he ever was called an alcoholic, but I think he probably drank heavily at one point in his life. So he knew the dangers. And I remember him sitting down with me, trying to counsel me, like, be careful with this, be careful with this. And I remember an aunt and uncle, too, when their son came home, who was one of my party buddies, bouncing off the walls, screaming at us, like, what are you guys doing out there, right? all of these signs, and I was probably, late teens, early 20s at that point, but kept ignoring them. And then, I drank until I was 38. First time through, right? 37. I was 37 when I came in. And so, from the mid to late 20s to 37, man, I did a lot of damage in those times, those years.
If you've been cut off, that's probably a sign that you might have a problem. People who don't have a problem don't go through situations where they're somewhere or at home and their spouse goes, you know what? No more, you're done. You're cut off. I've been cut off before by my wife, and she didn't know I had a problem, she said. I've never cut my wife off, ever. I've seen her drunk maybe a handful of times in the 20 years that I've known her. Maybe she's gotten tipsy. I can't remember a time where she was so sick that she was throwing up. So she's never been cut off. But I've been cut off by people before who weren't even saying I have a problem. It's like, no, you got to stop. You're driving home. No, you got to stop. Little things like that. And you may think, oh, that person's just they're overreacting. People who don't have drinking problems know how to stop. And if you have to be told to stop, maybe you need to give some thought to that.
It's funny. You brought it back a memory to me. We were at a relative's house for Thanksgiving. We went there every year for Thanksgiving, and my brothers and sisters, or one of my brothers and my sister, so there's three of us, and maybe other people, but certainly three of us, were watching the football game, and we had a handle of vodka in there with us, and we were hitting it pretty hard. And my uncle at the time, who I didn't know, I found out later that he was 30 years sober in AA. I found this out, man, a long time. I never knew it. Came in there and really pissed off and took the bottle away from us, right? Like, you guys, we were loud. We were having a good time. And I can remember, like, what the fuck is he doing? Like, taking away our alcohol, But like you said, I had forgotten all about that memory until you just mentioned being cut off, and I've been cut off too. Like, oh, you've had enough. Or I can remember I would go to, Maine. My first time in AA, there was an intervention done on me while we were on vacation up in Maine at a family cottage, and I can remember them putting the booze away. Like everybody would have a couple of drinks. There was a happy hour around 5:00. Everybody would have a couple of drinks, and I would have I would have as many as I can. And I can remember them like putting the booze away. And I realize now they were putting away because they didn't want me to drink more, Like they could all have 2 or 3 drinks or whatever it was. And if they wanted to have 4 drinks one night, God bless them. But most of them had, 2 drinks, maybe 3 drinks. I was in there pouring me drink after drink. I'll go freshen up the drinks for everybody. And while I was in the kitchen,
there we go.
While I was in the kitchen, take a couple shots off the handle while we're making drinks for everybody else. Crazy stuff.
My mother-in-law used to drink Seagram 7 and 7.
Yeah.
And my father-in-law at one point got really pissed, and he would replace the Seagram 7 with a cheaper generic liquid because you drank too much of this, so I'm going to buy the cheaper stuff. That's probably the sign of a problem. If the person buying your stuff says we're not getting the good stuff anymore because you go through it too fast and it's too expensive, she never found recovery or anything before she died, but I always remember that he refused to buy the Seagram 7 anymore because she went through it too fast. And it wasn't like a little cup. It was one of those big, tall, old plastic cups, like almost like these Tupperware type old school glasses that are 24 ounces.
Yeah.
A big cup that she'd have before she went to bed. She'd just have one. Half the bottle was in there.
Right. It's funny. I remember being out with some friends, really good friends at the time, and their brother-in-law was married to one of the people's sister. I remember being over there. We were going on a haunted hayride or something, and they had a bottle of wine, and wherever we were, they didn't have wine glasses. So the brother-in-law, who I ended up finding out before I recognized I had a problem, and I went to get help. He had a problem, and they said, I don't know if he ever went to AA. I lost contact with the people, but he brings out water glasses, and he's like, "Hey, these work?" I'm like, "That works for me." So fill up the water glass with wine, like literally, like a 12-ounce water glass, And I remember, all the people around us saying, they're not drinking like that, but he and I were drinking like that. We were drinking as much as we could.
I struggle with drinking out of anything but a proper wine glass.
Do you?
Because if I was drinking out of like a regular glass, I'd have a problem. And if I was drinking out of a tuned crystal glass,
right,
then I didn't have a problem.
Sophisticated.
I was very sophisticated because I drink Cabernet in a Cabernet glass.
Right. Right. Not just any glass, right?
No. It's a Cabernet glass. Right. And I knew enough that you don't fill the whole glass up. You fill a quarter of the way, so that it has room to breathe and it lands on your tongue the right way, which is why I had to keep filling it up.
All right.
It wasn't that I was drinking a lot of it. I was drinking very little, just a lot of little glasses.
One of the times when I relapsed, one of the signs, it's funny that you were talking about this, is, it was 14 years and life had changed for me. So when I relapsed, I had more money available to me. And I drank cheap booze and cheap beer, right? And I've told this story, but this was when I knew I mean it. This was when I knew I was in real trouble. And this was December. This was around Christmas time. I relapsed in October, and this was Christmas time. So not even maybe 3 months into my relapse, but I went out and bought a really nice bottle of tequila. It cost me like $90 at the time, and that was a lot of money for a bottle of tequila at the time. And it was a small bottle, right? We're talking a small bottle of tequila for about $90. It wasn't a handle or anything. And I remember going out trying to be sophisticated with it as I'm drinking it in my basement where nobody can see me, right? Trying to be sophisticated, and I sucked that thing down like it was a $12 bottle of Corvo, you know?
Well, I would
And I
drink it.
realized like, oh,
I would drink it alone too because I didn't have sophisticated friends who could enjoy it and understand the sophistication of a $90 bottle of tequila
right.
the way I do. So I have no other choice
Yeah.
but to drink it by myself. That's
Well-
another huge red flag.
Right.
If you're drinking alone, and I struggle with this, that how could you say that I have a problem if I'm drinking alone? And I really struggle with that because I drank alone all the time. There's nobody else to drink with me. So when am I going to be able to drink if I don't drink alone? If you're drinking by yourself, that's probably a problem, especially if it's significant.
Yeah, it's certainly a caution sign, right? It's like I said, there's stop signs or red flags, and there's yellow flags or caution signs, right? If you're drinking alone, if you do most of your drinking alone, it is absolutely a caution sign. It is absolutely something that you should pay attention to, and just think about. And the easy thing to do is not drink and see how you feel. And if you feel like, oh man, I feel like I need a drink, or really, really want a drink, or crave a drink, you may want to, think about checking out those 20 questions that we talk about, and maybe seeing if you actually have a problem.
Yeah, those 20 questions are great because they are a low level. I think one of them is, is anybody concerned that you have a problem? Right. And if you look at the back of the book, when you go through the key, it's not like one of those, like if you have 18 or more, it's a problem. If it's like 15 to 17, it's like if you answered one of the 20, you may have a problem.
Right.
So you're done at one or two.
3 or 4, yeah, you definitely have a problem. Yeah, and there's simple things like, have you ever missed work because you drank too much? Like simple questions that, you don't think about. I certainly, who amongst us haven't woken up and feeling shitty after drinking and took a day off,
I went to work hungover, and it was almost in a way to torture myself. I would get through, and I wouldn't complain about the throbbing headache I have, because I did this to myself, and I deserve to be in pain, and I'm going to go to work like this. Yeah. And it's just what I have to expect of myself if I'm going to do this. I was almost self-flagellating.
Yeah. No, I never wanted to give up the money. I always wanted to go to work. I always said this followed me even to when I stopped drinking. I wanted to go to work sick because I wanted to take my days off when I was healthy.
Yes.
I didn't want to be home sick. I only had so many days that I could take off, and it's like, no, my wife used to say, "Oh, you should stay home. You're sick." I'm like, I don't want to stay home when I'm sick. I want to stay home when I'm feeling good, when I could do something, when I could have some fun. That's where I want to stay home. And I did that for years and years. I went to bed, and I shouldn't have. And nowadays you have a tendency to stay home if you have to go in because of all the different stuff we went through.
I don't go. I work from home.
Right.
But if I'm not feeling well, if I can't do the job the way I want to do it, I don't go to work. I call out because I want to set an example for my people that if you can't do what the job demands because you're not well, then don't do it. If you're not gonna be mentally there, don't do it. And I have a lot of demands on me, and if I can't do all of those things and feel good about it, then I'm not going to show up. I'm going to take that day so that this doesn't linger. I hope this gives you some food for thought. One, if you're an old timer and you've been around the block a few times, I hope this gives you a smile of, yep, I did that. Yep, I can remember that. Or feel those times like I had all those warning signs and I ignored them. As we're talking through, I'm like, I could have nipped this in the bud at 18 and had 20 years where I wasn't miserable. And yet I didn't, because the pain of that was less than the pain of continuing. And if you're brand new and you think you might be overreacting, these are things that probably you have that I don't care whether you feel you're overreacting or not, you're in the right place. If you're questioning your drinking and you're listening to this, listen to some more episodes, call someone. There are 12-step programs. There's smart recovery. There's all types of things out there. Give it a shot and see what you identify with, because you don't have to live like this, and life can be incredibly better than it is today. Giving up alcohol. It's not like your life is going to be awful. That's what I thought. No, your life is going to be better than you could ever imagine because you gave up this one thing. And you can live free. Steve, thanks for coming and talking through this.
You're welcome, Matt. Great to see you. See you tomorrow night.
Absolutely. And we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody. You made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast, consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod.